Hello, friend. Welcome back. Fancy meeting you here once more. Instead of a gin joint, we're now a whiskey joint, so I hope you're prepared for a little old-fashioned cocktail, my friend. You seem like you need a stiff drink, and I got just the ticket for ya. We're gonna start by making a classic old-fashioned, okay? Did you know that the word cocktail was first defined in May of 1806 in an upstate New York newspaper called the Balance and Columbian Repository? I don't know what any of those words mean. I do know that their definition included a cocktail is defined as anything containing a unique combination of spirits, sugar, water, and bitters. What does that sound like to you? It sounds like an old-fashioned to me, and that's just what it is. The old-fashioned has been around since the 1700s, and it was made possible by the advent of bitters in 1690 in London, England. They exported the bitters to the Americas, to the colonies, and people were like, by God, this is a damn good cocktail, and they started to sip them. But when they started making the old-fashioned, it was actually served up. It was served just room temperature. And it was considered a matutinal cocktail. That's your word of the day, my friends, matutinal. It means they drank it in the morning. Just wake up and slug some whiskey back on your way to work. Who needs a shot of espresso when you got 2 ounces of whiskey, some sugar, bitters, and a little dilution from water in your glass? That'll kickstart your engines, my friend. It sure does mine. Before I became an accomplished home bartender, I briefly spent some time slinging ceramic and porcelain tiles to architects and designers. The old-fashioned was very popular in the early 1800s until the middle point of that century, when bartenders got bored of making the whiskey cocktail the old-fashioned way. So the full name of the old-fashioned, of course, is an old-fashioned whiskey cocktail. And that's because by the mid-century, bartenders started to get a little fancy. You know, they decided to serve it in stemware with a twist of lemon. And then later on, in the 1860s and 70s, they got even more crazy. And they're like, you know what? Why don't we add some liqueurs and other potions into this concoction? And drinkers who craved simplicity and nostalgia would then order, I just want an old-fashioned whiskey cocktail, which is where we get the name. So it was very popular throughout the 1800s and up until Prohibition, and thereafter it sort of receded into the shadows of the cocktail world as fruity sugar bombs of the 80s and 90s took hold of the delusional populace. But then thanks to the cocktail renaissance of the 90s and early aughts, and pop culture icons like Don Draper in Mad Men sipping on their stiff and stirred cocktails like the old-fashioned, as you can see, I am in fact stirring it. I'm keeping my bar spoon hugged tight to the interior wall of my glass because I don't want to add texture or aeration. I want this to have a silky, velvety mouthfeel, free of unwanted bubbles. I'm going to add 1 large ice cube to my double old-fashioned glass and strain in my cocktail. This is the classic whiskey old-fashioned whiskey cocktail. So in my time as a tile person, I really did try to model myself after Don Draper. A lot of womanizing and toxic masculinity kind of defined my career in tile sales. But one fateful day, I was wearing a full suit in true Draper fashion and marched into a client's office, dismayed to find that they did not have an elevator, because I was lugging with me about 60 pounds of tile samples, because tiles are a visual and tactile medium, and I was about to convince architects and designers that they simply must buy my tiles. So I sunk into a deep squat because I had to pick it up like a pedestrian, pick up my own tile samples from the box. I sunk into a deep squat in my fashionable trousers like the ones I'm wearing now. And I braced my core, I went to lift, and as I achieved liftoff, I heard a terrifying rip. I looked down, and I can see my lady bits, and I march up the stairs, and at the top of the stairs, there's a full-length mirror where I can better appreciate the damage I've done to my trousers before giving an hour-long presentation to a group of complete and utter strangers. Now I'm making a coffee-infused rum old fashioned. I've added 3 tablespoons of whole coffee beans to a cup of rum, and I've let that sit for about 8 hours. I check in on it about every 4 hours or so. I'm adding a teaspoon of demerara sugar. I prefer syrup over the bitters-soaked sugar cube of yore, because really, when you get to the bottom of the glass, when you do the sugar cube method, you get a lot of granularity and it kind of disrupts the silky mouthfeel. And then all that sweetness is at the end of the cocktail as opposed to being blended therein. So I get to the top of the stairs, I confront the mirror, and I see that my pants, which were once pants, are much more like ashless chaps. Yeehaw! And we're about to get into the room with all of these architects and designers, and I managed to use my box of tiles to shield my own and shuffle graciously along the walls until I insert myself into the room and I take a seat. I set out the lunches, which I've also brought with me for these architects and designers. I take a seat and I call out to them like a debutante, like a needy, consumptive child, and I say, "Lunch is served." And then they come over, they come in, I stay seated again like a debutante as they all walk in. These people I'm about to try to sell thousands, tens of thousands of dollars worth of tile to. They come in, I stay seated, and then once they're in their places and all sorted, I say, I'm gonna have to be staying just as I am because I obliterated my pants on the way in, but I am not one that's afraid of a challenge. I'm unflappable as my fellow old-fashioned connoisseur, Don Draper. And I will proceed with this presentation. So I think the moral of the story here is that my novel Let It All Hang Out approach, sort of like this delicious coffee rum old fashioned, really helped to endear me to these clients and made me a classic like the whiskey old fashioned. Cleaning up the edges of my orange peel, I'm going to express the citrus oils into the surface of the drink, and I'm going to rub that around, give a rudimentary twist, and drop it in. This smells absolutely delicious. On the nose, we're getting this fantastic coffee flavor, which is accentuating the citrus from the orange. The rum is based with fermented molasses, which gives it a much rounder, sweeter profile, whereas our whiskey old fashioned is going to be spicier, drier, and have a sharper finish. Let's see which one we like better. Delicious. It tastes like the best breakfast I've ever had. Cheers, friend. I'm sure I'll see you again soon.